Hello and welcome to ITA's live session on sexual harassment in the workplace, conducted in collaboration with the Manipur State Legal Services Authority. Joining us today, we have an eminent lawyer, Veena Gora from Bombay. She is a feminist lawyer who had represented many women cases in the High Court of Bombay, Supreme Court of India, and the others trial courts in the matter of domestic violence cases, women's property rights, and sexual harassment at workplace and sexual assault cases. Welcome, Veena.
Thank you very much, Sophia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, to start with, Veena, see, what kind of conduct are considered sexual harassment in the workplace, like in terms of verbal, physical, and other? Okay.
First of all, I would like to thank ETA as well as the Manipur State Legal Services Authority for having me here. And I think it's a very important subject that we need to have awareness about, because we have laws in place, and sometimes unless it is used by women, it merely remains on paper. And unless women use the law itself, I think the law does not get its strength. And so therefore, thank you very much for having me here and having this discussion. Now, getting to the subject itself, just a little before I get into what really constitutes sexual harassment at workplace, I think it's important to contextualize how the law came about, if you don't mind that, Sophia.
Yeah, sure,
The whole discussion on sexual harassment at workplace started with a very well-known but an unfortunate case of Bhavri Devi, where Bhavri Devi was a Satin and who was gang raped in Rajasthan. And a collective of women's groups, such as yourself, actually took up this case in the Supreme Court. And a 1997 judgment was given by the Supreme Court for the first time, recognizing and defining what sexual harassment at workplace is. And it was only 16 years later that we have this law, which is Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. So therefore, you will find what constitutes the definition of sexual harassment under this law itself. And what happens is, because of a lack of knowledge or information, many a times the sexual harassment itself is interpreted very restrictively. We understand sexual harassment somewhere as what we call as quid pro quo, or give or take situation, where, for example, someone tells you that either have sex with me, sleep with me, I will give you something else, or I will not give you something, I will take away from you. So therefore, the understanding of sexual harassment normally is this quid pro quo, give and take kind of a situation. However, the manner in which sexual harassment has been defined under the law in India is much broader. Okay, and it includes certain conducts which necessarily need not be a quid pro quo or a give and take situation, but could be any instances of sexual harassment. Now, so what does sexual harassment itself means? It means any conduct which is unwelcome to the woman and is of a sexual nature amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. So what is important here to understand is what is the point of view. The point of view here is not of society. The point of view here is not of the man himself, but the point of view is of the woman. So any conduct that is unwelcome to me, which is of a sexual nature, amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. Now, this conduct can be either physical conduct, verbal conduct, non-verbal conduct, digital images, etc. Anything that makes me uncomfortable and that is not welcome to me in my workplace would amount to sexual harassment at workplace. Now, the definition of sexual harassment presently comes under two laws. One is the act, like I said, the Sexual Harassment, or what is called commonly as the POSH Act, as well as it has also been made a criminal offense under the Indian Penal Code, which is Section 354A. Now, 354A talks about sexual harassment itself. It can be on the road, it can be anywhere else, and not necessarily in the workplace. So it's much broader. But sexual harassment at workplace is particularly restricted to workplace itself. So, for example, when I say physical could mean touching somebody in a certain way that is not makes you comfortable. Verbal could be making comments, making remarks, and the remarks need not necessarily mean, for example, asking, saying that will you sleep with me or will you have sex with me. Okay, even passing comments on women's body, like when you go to a workplace saying that you look very hot in a salwar kameez, or you look very hot in a sari, or you look in a certain way. Or, for example, we have situations where, like in workplace, sometimes become an extension of college. You know, like how in colleges, even there, it's not permissible, where you start rating women, you know, on her sexual hotness or whatever it's called, giving her, you know, she's a 5, she's a 9, she's a 10. This would also amount to sexual harassment at workplace. For example, asking very unnecessary personal questions. You know, do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a sex life? You know, how is your sex life? How is your personal whatever? So therefore, if it doesn't really connect to work, but it is sexual in nature, that would amount to sexual harassment at workplace. Another situation is, like, for example, a lot of times in some offices, for example, you may be sharing a computer, you know, leaving sexually explicit images, you know, of women not fully clothed that make you uncomfortable. So even such things amount to sexual harassment at workplace. These days we have in offices what are WhatsApp groups. You know, in these WhatsApp groups, sending messages that are sexual in nature, which make you uncomfortable, would also amount to sexual harassment. Now, a lot of times, women, the people believe that if it is unwelcome, okay, that means I should then have communicated to the person that this is not unwelcome. I mean, this is unwelcome to me. So the woman should have actually first said a no. Only then does it become sexual harassment. In all cases, that is not a necessity. You know, per se, certain acts are sexual harassment by itself. There is no need to comment on a woman, on her woman's body, on her other personal character, etc. So therefore, there is no need that in every case the woman should have said, I do not appreciate this, or I do not want this. So basically, what we need to understand is the purpose of the law is to ensure that women have a safe working place. The law itself says that women not having a safe workplace and there being sexual harassment at workplace actually violates the woman's right to life, right to practice a profession under the Constitution, a right to work with dignity. So what we need to, as women, understand is that any conduct which is sexual in nature, which is unwelcome to me, would come in within the definition of sexual harassment at workplace.
Thanks, Veena. That was an elaborate explanation on the sexual harassment, what it amounts to, what conducts amount to sexual harassment. So, can you explain, like, what is a workplace? Is it like we all know a factory or an office is a workplace, but then we meet, like on an office outing or a meeting out of the workplace, like in a restaurant or on a road or, wherever, not like that in the definition, like how we all perceive workplace is, like office or in factory. So if something happens, in within those areas, so still that will, if something like, in terms of sexual harassment, so that will amount to sexual harassment at workplace. Can you explain?
So, like now, what we say is sexual harassment of women at workplace. So, therefore, we've gone into the definition of sexual harassment itself. So, yes, Sophia, it's very important to understand workplace. Again, some people believe that okay, if a workplace is in a, for example, in a certain mall, is it just the physical space of your work itself? It's not just the physical space of your work itself. It has two parts in that definition. One is the physical space of where you are, or, for example, anything in the course of work. Okay, so one is the sexual harassment in your workplace, as in the physical space. Second is that if you have gone somewhere in the course of your work, you're doing something in the course of your work, and there you are sexually harassed, even that amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. Now, what could this be? For example, the office provides you a bus to go to office. So now you are in that bus because you're getting to an office space. If there is sexual harassment in that bus, then that amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. Sometimes what happens is that you are deputed to go to another office on work. Okay, so you go to that workplace, and where you're deputed to. So it may not necessarily be your specific workplace. So you go there and someone harasses you. So you're in the course of your work. So that also amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. Now, for example, you have an office party. You may be drinking, you may be dancing, whatever it is. If it is your office party, then that becomes an extension of the workplace. Now, there was a very interesting case much before the act itself came in, where one of the MDs of a company had taken a woman to a hotel. He was staying in a hotel, so he called the stenographer to the office, to the business center in that hotel. And he sexually tried to sexually harass her. So one of the defense that he took was that this is not office workplace, but the court held that she had gone there on work. So therefore, it's an extension of the workplace. Okay, so that's one example. The second way he said is that he attempted to sexually harass me. He attempted to touch me. So then the Supreme Court there also says that it's not necessary for the woman to kind of wait till she's been molested or touched. Okay, even creating a situation whereby there's an attempt to sexual harassment, that would also amount to sexual harassment at workplace. A lot of times what happens is that in offices, what happens, even if it's not an official party, some of your colleagues may get together and go out for a drink in the evening. So now if there is a sexual harassment at workplace, if there is sexual harassment, then some people argue saying that that doesn't amount to sexual harassment at workplace, because you've not gone there on work, and nor is it your workplace. So what happens in situations like this? While there is no judgment or no court interpretation on it, my own interpretation of it would be that you have gone to that place as colleagues. You would not have gone out if he was not your colleague. It's not just a social event. Two is that if some instance happens there and you come back to work, okay, so you come back to work, and then because of what has transpired or what has happened in that evening out, that will affect your workplace too. So to me, that extension works, and it would amount to a workplace. Another situation which I should have mentioned in the earlier question is that sometimes what happens is that there'll be one instance of sexual harassment, okay, where he asks you for a date. You say, will you come out? And you say, I don't want to come out. So then what happens is that because of that, the man gets angry. And then he doesn't give you work, or gives you too much work, and then becomes very abusive, or whatever it may be, such that he creates a hostile work environment for you to work in. So then what happens is that even though there was one instance of sexual harassment, but it has resulted in a hostile work environment which adversely affects the woman, then that also amounts to sexual harassment at workplace. So one of the first things that we as women should do is not try to restrict the definition of both sexual harassment and workplace itself, to try and give it a slightly broader interpretation so that our workspaces and our work relationships are much more safer, and that we feel safe as women in workplace. You're on mute, Sophia. You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So, Veena, related to what you just explained, we had come across a case last year. The lady had complained for sexual harassment, and the whole her colleague or the whole employees in that company supported the alleged accused. Okay, she was not able to prove her case, and it was emotionally, mentally, and financially very draining for her. And ultimately, she left the city and went to another city. She just doesn't want to, pursue the matter further. So this kind of situation, what can a woman do when the whole the employees or your colleague turn against you because the accused is alleged accused is in a higher position? You have a vested interest from that particular person, and the victim has no support system, because I think end of the day you need witnesses, you need evidence to prove your case, right? So what should a woman like this do in this type of situation, according to you, Veena?
See, what happens, we need to understand that most offenses against women always happen in the privacy of a space. Whether it's domestic violence, then she's beaten in her house or she's mentally harassed in her house. Sexual assault or rape happens also when no one else is seeing, watching you. So similarly, sexual harassment also happens when there is no other direct witness or eyewitness to these cases. So therefore, women need not worry about the fact that there is no evidence, because the law somewhere understands that this is the situation when it comes to all forms of violence against women. So one is that, again, women should not restrict their options and possibilities in law by saying, I don't have any evidence. This happens both in domestic violence as well as in sexual harassment cases. One of the important things to understand is, in cases such as this, the statement of the woman herself hold a lot of evidential weightage. Okay, so if I make a statement saying that this is what happened and this is what he did, and if I stand by this statement and I'm consistent in my statement, I don't constantly keep changing, going back and forth, or creating a possible doubt, the statement of the woman herself can be and is very good evidence in itself. One. Two is, sometimes what happens is that there's an instance of sexual harassment. I'm in my boss's chamber. He says something to me. He tries to touch me, and I walk out of the room and I look very upset. And someone may have seen me there looking upset. So that person can also give evidence saying that, yes, on this occasion, I saw her, that she did come. I may then suddenly go to the bathroom to just kind of, make myself feel better, or just for some space. There, if someone asks me what happened, I don't tell them exactly what happened, but I can say, no, something really bad. Even those people will be circumstantial evidence that would be there. A lot of times, people these days, because CCTV footage is CCTV cameras are everywhere. People can even actually call for CCTV cameras to show how I was when I walked out, whatever, or if it happened in a place where there is a camera. Two is that sometimes there will be these, sexual harassment could also mean sending certain messages. So WhatsApp messages, SMS messages, Facebook Messenger, all of this also will be evidence in the sexual harassment, under the sexual harassment complaint. Now, it also happens most often, it is always a person higher than you who actually harasses the woman. So obviously the witnesses will want to support the boss, so or the person who is senior. So therefore, so people think that no one will stand up for me. But that is why you have a system that is put in place in the Sexual Harassment Act, which is the committee, the IC or the internal committee. So they kind of also know that, when a person is in a position of power, no one may be able to come and give evidence against that person. So the committee should be senior enough, should be mature enough, and should have a certain experience, which we will come to when we discuss what is the IC. So therefore, one need not worry. And the statement of the woman herself, if it is consistent, is good evidence under law. And the law does recognize that it's very difficult for women to get direct evidence. The second thing is that the sexual harassment at workplace is what we call a civil law. We have two kinds of major kinds of law in our country. One is the civil law and one is the criminal law. So a lot of times what we see in movies, etc., or our understanding is of criminal law, where the proof or the burden of proof and evidence must be very, very high. So where you feel that what we call, it should be beyond reasonable doubt. You should prove your case to such strength. That is not really essential. Sexual harassment law is a civil law, which is on what we call preponderance of probability, which means the committee just has to decide whether this probably could have happened. So the burden of proof that we call is a little lower than what it is in criminal law. Okay, so therefore, your statements, the circumstances around it, etc., also is good enough to prove sexual harassment at workplace, and one need not worry so much about direct eyewitness evidence or some kind of documentary evidence. But if it is there, women should have the presence of mind to call for it, like CCTV footage. Like, for example, when I said hostile work environment, so suddenly I'm doing 25 projects. And from the very next month, because I said no to this person, my projects are only about 12, and with no actual reason. So then I can show that this was a hostile work environment. That also goes towards proving that possibly something happened, preponderance of probability. Sometimes what happens is that I am getting a very good score in assessment in office. Okay, but suddenly my assessment goes down with no valid reason. So I can call for all of this surrounding circumstantial evidence. So I must actually, whenever an instance of sexual harassment happens, we intend to file a complaint of sexual harassment. We women are very hesitant to put the true facts in the complaint. If the man uses certain abusive words, like we have in India, which are very common, are MCBC, abusers, etc., which also amount to sexual harassment. But you get scared to put those words because that's how we women are sometimes. We're very hesitant. But we must find the courage to actually put these words and what exactly happened in the sexual harassment incidents and put it in the complaint, so that the probability that the committee will look at it as, the woman wouldn't have made up such a large story. So there's a probability that this could have happened. So we must find the courage to do that and sit back and think a little bit and say, what is the possible evidence that what I've spoken of now, messages, my work assessment, my work itself, and see how we can actually build that case to prove before the committee. So one need not worry about
of the witnesses, and the woman's statement itself will be.
And also what happens sometimes is that, the sexual harassment is also done by people who are very popular in an office. Someone who's always funny, who's cracking jokes, so who's very popular. There have been cases where there are people who are, very, very vivacious. So they have this tendency to make loose comments. And these days, people come from all backgrounds and from everywhere. It's not just certain urban upper class women who are working. People come from 2-tier cities, 3-tier cities, etc. And culturally, people are very different. So sometimes some people may take a joke. You may take some certain amount of joke, which is okay by you, but it's not okay by me. So then what happens when I file a complaint? I become this very bad person because I have shut a very a fun office I have made into a very serious office. So therefore there are chances you will not find evidence. So women do need a lot of courage, because filing a complaint also makes that whole situation in office quite hostile to women. But that's the job of the employer as well as the IC, to ensure that something like that does not happen.
Okay. So, Veena, another case is now just want to clarify on this. Like, if a third party is involved, for example, in an office, if it's a consensual, whatever, what is it called? Someone asks some favor, sexual favor, and the second party, it's okay with her, but then the third party kind of in the group gave it's hamper her promotions or her increments or anything like that, because the second party has been meeting all the advances or of the employer. So can the third party, the third lady, complain sexual harassment against the employers and the second party?
See, it's a very interesting question, Sophia. Now, for this, I'll just like to go a little bit to the American law. Okay. Now, what happens in America is that the sexual harassment law comes out of what is called anti-discrimination law. Okay, so there were these situations where someone was having an affair because of which I was discriminated upon. So in America, it's much clearer. This would amount to maybe sexual harassment. But in India, that's not how the law emerges. The law emerges from the fact of harassment and violence. Okay, so such an instance may not, because here I have to be sexually harassed and I should have a hostile work environment. A consensual relationship with someone else may not result in sexual harassment at workplace for me. However, most offices also these days have anti-discrimination laws. So then this would maybe go into your HR policy violation and the HR hearing and inquiry. So it may not necessarily come into sexual harassment at workplace. Now, because you brought this up, I would like to take this a little further. And sometimes what happens is, when we look at definition of sexual harassment and what happens to sexual harassment. Now, many a times people believe that, if, for example, if a woman files a complaint of sexual harassment, a lot of people will say, this was actually a consensual relationship, after which it turned sour. So now she's filing a complaint of sexual harassment at workplace. We need to understand this. One is that who is having an affair with who? Okay, if the boss is having, a male boss is having an affair with a woman who's in the lower than him in hierarchy, there is already a power dynamic in that workspace. Okay, so therefore, if the boss tells a woman that I want to go out with you or I want to have a relationship, the woman may not really be in a position to actually say no. So she may have given consent to that relationship because of the virtue of this power hierarchy. So therefore, we should look at it as the consent itself is actually vitiated, or not really a consent in itself. Now, after the relationship breaks up, it obviously creates a hostile work environment. So in such situations also, we must go case by case and not merely brush it aside by saying, oh, this is sour grapes or a relationship gone sour. That there are instances where consensual relationship can also amount to sexual harassment. Now, the whole idea, I feel, especially when we're talking to women who are working, some of you maybe may have faced sexual harassment. Some of you may be in internal committees. Some of you may be supporting women. Some of you may be having policies that you create for women. What I think is important in looking at a case like this, whether it's sexual harassment, domestic violence, is to be able to develop a way of looking at it from a woman's perspective. we have to develop a woman's eye, a woman's gaze into this, and not get caught up by what we are brought up with, these patriarchal notions. Like sometimes you have a woman who wears a short skirt or a red lipstick and comes to office in a certain way, and she's very loud, she makes noise, she drinks, she smokes. Now, if such a woman files a complaint of sexual harassment, one of the first reactions we ourselves have as women is to say, oh, come on, she asked for it. How can she come dressed like that? I think that is where insensitivity creeps in. And we as women have to say, however I'm dressed, whatever I'm doing, my consent to a conduct for me is very, very essential. And if I say something is unwelcome to me, it is unwelcome to me. Okay, it does not give anybody a right, just because I look a certain way or I behave a certain way, that they can actually take advantage of the situation. And we have to remember that workplaces are formal places. They're not our friends' homes or our relatives' homes where we've gone for a wedding or we've gone for a party. Even there should not be sexual harassment. That then the criminal law comes into existence. But especially in office spaces, we have to remember that relationships are formal, and breaching those relationships in order to have this kind of oppressive sexual relationships, okay, would backfire on you. That is why very many companies, especially European or American companies, have something called a disclosure clause, where if you're in a sexual relationship or a personal relationship, you have to disclose it to the company, so that tomorrow then the woman doesn't take a claim of sexual harassment. So even if you have disclosed it and subsequently, because you've broken up, the boss then ill treats you, to me that would amount to sexual harassment. So therefore, we will understand this law better instead of going by instance from instance, if we are able to look at it as women with a much broader and a more sensitive perspective.
Okay, can a member of an LGBT community, faces sexual harassment at workplace from a woman employer or a perpetrator?
One is that under the Sexual Harassment Act, the Supreme Court in a judgment has interpreted the respondent or the perpetrator to be gender neutral. Okay, so which means it can be filed against a woman. However, now when we say it's not one entity or one in that sense community. I mean, it involves trans, lesbians, gay, etc. So a man, any person who identifies themselves as a man will not be able to file a complaint. But anyone, I would think that identifies themselves as a woman, then would be able to file. Now, again, about transgender people, there is no judgment, or the courts haven't got an opportunity to interpret it. But I would believe that, yes, if a transgender person identifies themselves as a woman, then it would be possible for them to file a complaint against the woman.
So what are the laws that deals with sexual harassment at workplace?
See, the laws are that I spoke about. One is the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act of 2013, which defines what is sexual harassment, which defines what happens in situations of sexual harassment at workplace. In addition to that, you have Section 354A, and you have 354D, stalking, stalking, sexual harassment, voyeurism, disrobing a woman, rape, etc. Those are what come in the Indian Penal Code. Okay, those don't necessarily amount to sexual harassment at work. Need not be restricted to sexual harassment. So anywhere a woman is sexually harassed while she's on the road, in a train, wherever, by someone else, any man, it would amount. If someone follows a woman digitally, he's stalking her, that is also an offense. If, for example, a woman is in a changing room in a shop, and someone is peeping, that would be voyeurism, that would also amount to, that's also a sexual assault kind of a law. Then of course you have the rape laws. But I think what is important for us here is this act itself and section 354A. Now, another thing is that, for example, if I'm molested or I'm sexually harassed at workplace, I have two options. One is I can file a complaint within my company for sexual harassment at workplace under the Act. At the same time, I can also file a police complaint. Just because I have filed one doesn't stop me from filing the other. Okay, but only what happens is that it becomes very difficult for women to follow up to cases. Many a times women don't want to go to police stations, etc. It's not essential. It depends on the gravity and the seriousness of the offense. But just because I have filed a complaint doesn't mean that I can't go to the police, or just because I've gone to the police, it doesn't mean that I can't file a complaint under the sexual harassment law.
Okay. There is a question. Okay, I think we'll take the question later. So, in what constitute the committee, the internal committee in a workplace? What is the norm for setting up that committee, and who are the members, and how do they yeah.
See, one is that we must remember what people, if many working women are here, normally an inquiry happens with one inquiry officer. Okay. But under the sexual harassment law, it's different. You have to constitute what is called an internal committee. So any office space with more than 10 or more people have to have what is called an internal committee. Okay. If any employer doesn't have an internal committee, or if it is less than 10% of people, or if it is unorganized sector like domestic help at home, etc., for them also the law has given a provision, and every district is supposed to have a local complaints committee or the local committee. So the law says, one, for each office you have to have an internal committee. Two is that if they don't have, then you also have the right to approach the local committee. So organizations such as ETA, as well as the Legal Services Authority, Women's Commission in Manipur, etc., must ensure that at every district level they have a local complaints committee, and that every company, every office must have an internal committee. If they don't have it, it's a violation of the law, and it can result in fine as well as revocation of license. Okay, so that is one. So if a woman faces sexual harassment at workplace, she has the right to file a complaint. Who deals with this complaint? It is the internal committee. Now, what constitutes this internal committee? The law says that the internal committee must be constituted of senior women employees in the office. It can also have male members. It should be women who are commonly known to have be interested in women's issues and women's rights within the office. So senior level employees who are known to, or who are working on and interested in women's issues. So if you have a committee, more than 50% must be women. Okay, so if you have a committee of 5, 3 of them must be women. It must be headed by a woman. Okay, so even the local complaints committee, this is a similar constitution. Two, the most important thing is that every committee must have an external member. An external member is someone who is not connected to the company in any way, but is a person who is either someone who is working on women's issues, or who knows about the laws of sexual harassment, etc., or could belong to an NGO, need not belong to an NGO, can be an individual, etc. So therefore, one is that it should have senior women members. More than 50% of it should be women. It should be headed by a woman. And third is that it should have an external member. Now, this external member is very, very important, because what we have seen before the coming into effect the law itself, even now, a lot of times whenever a woman file complaint of sexual harassment, There is a lot of pressure on her from the company, especially if the person is a senior person against whom she's filed the complaint. There's a lot of pressure on the woman to withdraw this complaint. So therefore, the external member is there to ensure that there is no such pressure on the woman, one. Two is that also sometimes these committees are very insensitive. There we've heard of cases where sometimes the committee tells the woman, why don't you show us what happened? Or ask certain questions which are very embarrassing to the woman, only to humiliate her. So the external member is also a person and should be a strong enough person to ensure that the hearing or the inquiry that takes place is also fair to the woman, and that she is not harassed by the process itself. So that is also the job of the external member, to ensure there's no pressure on her, ensure that there's no pressure on her to withdraw the case. Now, what is the process that the IC has to follow? One is that when the woman files a complaint of sexual harassment, this complaint, as soon as the woman files a complaint of sexual harassment, I would think that every IC, at least the chairman or the external member, must talk to this woman, ask her how she is and what has happened. Because what happens normally when you file a complaint against somebody, then having filed the complaint, she puts herself in a more vulnerable position. You know, like you were talking about earlier, that like other employees may be nasty to her, or the person against whom she's filed may be nasty to her. So therefore, the committee has certain powers to pass what are called interim orders. Interim means in the meantime. Okay, so till the inquiry is conducted, the committee has certain powers. Those powers will be what? For example, if the woman says that I have filed this complaint against this man, so I don't want to work with him. So then the man can be transferred somewhere else. Or the woman herself may say, no, I want to be transferred somewhere else. Okay. Or you can tell the man not to report to work for a while. Or you can tell the woman that, okay, don't report to work for a while, but this will not be treated as a holiday for you, and this will be counted as your working time. So so therefore they can say, they can transfer the man or the woman, ask her not to come to work so that she feels safe. If she requires some kind of counseling, that can be provided to her. So it's very important to understand that when you file a complaint, there's an attempt made to put a system in place so that she feels safe and secure. And that is a very important job of the IC. The job of the IC is not merely only to do this inquiry, to ensure that through this period that the woman also feels safe. There is no kind of retaliation against her. So that they have to do first. Then the copy of the complaint will be served on the person against whom the complaint is filed. That person is given an opportunity to file the reply. And any document filed by the complainant must be given to the respondent, as we call him. And anything filed by him must be given to the complainant. Because oftentimes what happens when a woman files a complaint against a man, one of the first things he will tell you is, oh, you know, she's not doing her job properly, therefore to cover that up, she's filed that complaint. And he will produce certain documents. Now, I must have a right to defend myself against those documents. So the committee cannot take into consideration any evidence that is not being given to either of the parties. Okay. Then the woman is allowed to make her statement. And there is cross-examination by the respondent. Witnesses are also cross-examined. The man is also, if he makes a statement, he will also be cross-examined. His witnesses also will be cross-examined. Now, if women hear me saying that there is cross-examination, this and that, they sometimes feel very intimidated. Okay. But at the same time, you should not feel intimidated, because if you don't have cross-examination, if an appeal is filed, probably the court will say that this is not a fair inquiry. So we have to remember that the law also says that principles of natural justice have to be followed. What is principles of natural justice? One is that the committee must not have any bias. And two is that both parties must be heard. Okay. And three is that if a complaint is made, like for example, if I'm in the committee and a complaint is made against someone who's very close to me, then I have a certain bias, or I'm in a position to whatever, then I can't be part of that committee. Okay. So therefore, and the fairness is that both parties have to be heard. so that the person is also given a fair opportunity to defend himself. So sometimes what happens is that witnesses, because it's a boss, they may not have the courage to come and give a statement before their own boss. So the committee must assure the witnesses that there will not be any retaliation. If there is, you can go back to the committee and say, hello, I came and gave a statement before you, and see what is happening to me now. And the committee has the power to actually take action on that. Two is that we can then say, okay, you give your statement in his absence. There are possibilities where you can say, okay, we will delete your name, and then he can ask, give certain questions. You may not necessarily have a face-to-face cross-examination. He can give his written questions. So there are very many systems that have been put in place, that internal committees, anyone who's a member of, must have training programs to understand what the process is. Once all that is done, then the committee gives a report on whether it amounts to sexual harassment or it doesn't amount to sexual harassment. If it amounts to sexual harassment, then the committee has the power to pass punishments, which could be anything from a censure or asking the person to apologize, to termination, to demotion, to withholding his increment, etc. The punishment can be anything. So very briefly, this is the process and the function of the IC. The IC's function is also to actually create awareness within the company about the law, about the policy, that they exist. All employees must know that who is in the IC, whether there is an IC. You must put up posters. You must conduct workshops within the organization, etc., bringing about awareness of this law. Sorry, Sophia, I'm just trying to fit in a lot in the little time that we have.
Thank you so much. It's a very insightful explanation. Just one thing, like if the appellant or the victim is not satisfied with the finding of the IC inquiry, does she has any other options out of the committee for findings? What can she do if she feel that this is not she's not happy with the findings of the IC?
See, one is some organizations have an appellate. If she's not happy with the internal committee's report, the law says she can file an appeal. Okay. Now, sometimes the companies themselves have an appellate system. Okay, it goes to the board or whatever she can. But a lot of times they don't have that. The law is not very clear on this, while they say that the appellate forum will be as notified under the Standing Orders Act, which is a little complicated and technical. But in many states, like in Bombay, etc., appeal can be filed in the Labour and Industrial Court. Okay, and in many situations there may not be an appellate forum. Then the woman will have to see whether there is a way of approaching the High Court by saying there is no other appellate forum, so I have nowhere else to go but come before you. So that's why we see many cases which are filed in the higher courts. But yes, this is a problem with the law, that the law does not define appellate forum very clearly, and it is one more point of where we can actually work with the government and ask them to clarify, issue a notification under the law, and clarify as to who is the appellate authority in each of the states. Otherwise, the law itself says yes, an appeal can be filed. Where is a little questionable now. In certain states, it is the Labour and Industrial Court. In certain others, it's not very clear.
Yeah, is there any mechanism for monetary compensation for the victim who faces sexual harassment at workplace?
Yes. Actually, the concept of compensation in India, we've always had under what is called the workman's compensation. If you're in the work and you get hurt, etc. But this is also something that has now come into violence against women. like Domestic Violence Act also has a concept of compensation. The Supreme Court in the Nalsa judgment, and there is it was the law of compensation was brought in for acid attack and sexual assault or rape victims, etc. Every state is supposed to have a scheme under the Nalsa judgment, that is the National Legal Aid Board. They had given a scheme to the government. So there's a scheme in all other law, in domestic violence as well as rape laws. Its compensation is also recognized under the sexual harassment law specifically. Specifically, it says that in addition to the punishment, the woman will also be given a compensation for one, loss of work, loss of pay, loss of opportunity in her career, as well as emotional and mental trauma. Now, the IC can ask then that the respondent pay the compensation for the woman. That compensation amount can be withdrawn from his salary, etc. So this is a very, very new and very important right for the woman, that yes, she does have a right of compensation. However, what happens is that very few internal committees actually award compensation, because they feel that then everyone will start filing complaints only because of for compensation. However, we must understand it's not very easy for a woman to actually say, I've been sexually harassed or sexually abused. And she's not going to only file a complaint because so that she can get some compensation. Because as we know, especially anyone who's on Facebook and watching this program will be women from middle class, upper middle class families, where still, even in many parts of the country, for a woman, being allowed to work is still an option or a privilege that the family gives her. You know that if anything happens, if she comes late one day, they will tell you, now stop working, don't go to office. So if she actually comes back to home and tells her husband or her father or her family that I'm being sexually harassed, one of the first things they will tell you is stop working. So therefore, for women to actually file a complaint of sexual harassment, it's a very difficult decision, and it involves a lot of things. So therefore, the possibility that she'll file a false case is very, very minimal. And I think ICs must try and give compensation, which is a right recognized in the law for the woman herself. Yes.
Thank you very much, Veena. We don't have much time. We'll just take a few questions, Veena. Our viewer, the first question is, what can be done if the institutional committee is not in favor of the woman, but the other try to suppress or pacify the situation for the sake of the prestige of the institution? So this is again the same question what I asked. If the appellant is not satisfied with the inquiry committee findings.
One more thing is also, because this is also organized by the Legal Services Authority, that see, the Women's Commission of each state also has a duty to ensure implementation of the law of related to women. So if there are certain committees, certain offices where they've not set up committees, or the committees are not fair, then you can approach the Women's Commission in a way, so that they can kind of prevail upon the thing. Two is that you can then also approach the court, okay, to say that this is not fair, or you must write a letter to the employer or to the committee and say that I want a reconstitution. Okay, and two, you must understand that no committee can pressurize the woman for the prestige of the company, because actually the companies also have to understand this, that it is better to deal with a complaint of sexual harassment rather than tomorrow it being out that the company tried to suppress the complaint. That's and any violation of this, if it goes to, for example, the labor commissioner, etc., if complaints are filed saying that ICs are not set up, they're not working properly, they're oppressing women, they have the right to actually take action on these complaints. But we must be aware of these laws and be able to use them when required.
Yeah, but we have many complaints, all the time for the women's commissions in all over the country. Like they're not functioning properly. They're working for the men instead of working for women. So it's little.
It is, but we can't stop trying. If
Yeah,
we
I
don't
know.
try, then institutions don't improve.
Yeah, true. Yes. Thank you so much, Reena. And then another question is, would the woman required evidence that you have already mentioned that the woman's statement itself is enough for filing a sexual harassment case, and she should be consistent in her statement throughout. That's what you have said. Then the another question is, how would you address the connection and overlap between racial and sexual violence? Generally, most of
Sorry,
the sexual harassment
I
faced
didn't hear
by
you, Sophia. How do I? Can you repeat that?
address how do you address the connection and overlap between racial and sexual violence? Okay, that's one. And generally, most of the sexual violence faced by North Eastern people are racially instigated. However, there is no law for racial discrimination in India, and accused are easily bailed out for sexual harassment case. Is there any non-bailable sexual harassment act? That's one of the questions. Okay, actually, what happened is, people from Northeast, like me or like my people, when we come out of our state, in terms of studies or to pursue our profession, we do face lot of discriminations. I'm talking about educated professional. I mean, first of all, women all over the country face discrimination, but for us it's an additional discrimination which we face. Men, the moment when they see a small eyes or small nose, for some reason, I don't know what goes in their head, it's very easy for them to pass a lewd comment or say something which they wouldn't have the courage to make the statement towards another woman from the mainland India, I would say, like, or big eyes or a big nose, as I mentioned, small eyes. So so I think this question is somewhat related to that. So however, there is no law for racial discrimination in India, and accused are easily bailed out. So she's asking, is there anything we can do about it? Is there a non-bailable sexual harassment act?
See, one is yes. I mean, I completely understand, and there is constantly an overlap in India, especially. We have of both race, caste, religion, etc. And so there is an overlap. One of the first things actually we must do is also, whenever you join your space, is to read your HR policy and code of conduct. Okay, because a lot of code of conduct in companies these days are bringing in anti-discrimination provisions. Okay, they may not directly come under the sexual harassment laws, but we hope that some of the bigger companies are bringing this in. I mean, of course, for caste, we have a law, but yes, the constitution says that there cannot be such discrimination. India desperately needs an anti-discrimination law. There are many people fighting for it and asking specifically for it. But there are certain IPC sections which say that, if you if you make comments or make any statements that will create ill will between two communities, or make certain kind of slurs, then they do amount to criminal offenses under the IPC. However, under the Sexual Harassment Act itself, you can bring it in saying that, if someone says, oh, because these northeastern women, they wear jeans and they wear tight clothes, whatever that it may be. If there is that kind of a comment made, which is a combination of the race as well as sexual, then it would come under the Sexual Harassment Act. Otherwise, per se, no, it does not. And I don't want to simply widen that thing. And yes, we need to have an anti-discrimination law in the country. Specifically.
Thank you, Veena. And the last question is, what if there is no committee in an organization? This also you have already answered. So can you just repeat this answer once again? I think you have already mentioned.
If you don't have a committee, one is that you can write to the management asking them to constitute it. If they fail to do it, you can go to these authorities such as the Labor Commissioner or or the government itself, asking them to constitute the committee. You can write to the Women's Commission asking them to say that please prevail upon my company. If the Women's Commission does not respond, then it becomes ground for you to file a writ petition. But even then, if they don't file and they don't constitute an IC, and if there is an instance of sexual harassment, then you can go before the local complaints committee, which is to be constituted at every district level in a particular state. Even if that is not constituted, then of course you have to then go before a court of law.
Okay. Any setup which has more than 10 employees working has to have, by law, it's mandatory. Yeah, it has to have an IC in that setup. Okay. So another question, Veena. Okay, questions are coming in. I thought that was the last one. Okay. Abuse. Domestic workplace does have psychological, social impact on the survivor. Even close relationships like spouse, a lot of times they just stop the middle of the battle on what is the best way to support or motivate a survivor in the course of fighting a case. How about the long-term rehabilitation?
Okay, it's an interesting question, but I think not necessarily within the ambit of law itself, but under the Sexual Harassment Act as well as the Domestic Violence Act, the services of a mental health expert can be taken up. But since we're all women, or mostly women, who are discussing this issue, I think certain things we ourselves can do. One is that we must first learn to say that, yes, I believe the woman. Normally, when this happens, it's very easy to support someone who lives in another building. But if it is my own sister-in-law, and my sister-in-law comes and tells me this is what is happening, your brother is doing this, the first thing I'll tell you is she's lying. Okay, or like I told you, if a woman who looks in a particular way comes and files a complaint, we don't want to believe her. One, as women, to tell ourselves that my first step will be to believe her. Then I will see how it works out. Because even as children, if my own daughter comes home, I don't have one, but I'm just saying, if a daughter comes home and says, I'm being followed to my school, then we'll say, that's because you must be going around. First thing we do is put the blame on the woman. So we must stop doing that. One, trust her, stop doing that. And two is that instant, and not very often, like for example, we will know domestic violence is happening in the next door. We can hear the woman. But if someone comes and asks me, will you stand as witness in court for me? I will say, no, I don't want to get into it because it's not my business. My husband won't allow me. Or even in office. So we as women should learn to support women and say we will stand by these women. Be it as witnesses, be it as support group, and say that when I believe you, and only then will things change. So we can't constantly pass the buck or the burden or the responsibility on someone else. We as women also high time have to take a stand in support of our fellow women.
Yeah, very true. See here, she's saying like basically when women, when they go through the domestic violence cases or any sexual assault cases, I mean, she just drop off. Yeah, due to the whatever pressure from the social.
Oftentimes, that's what I mean. When there is support, then the chances of her dropping out also will be less. I mean, we can't help it, but at least it will be less. Many times, why women don't file complaints is because they'll say no one will marry her. Her future is spoiled. So we have to change that environment. I mean, I can always tell you, go to a counselor, go to NGOs, they will support you. But these all we are aware of. But I think we need to also talk about long-term changes within ourselves and within society.
Yeah, then the woman also must stick to her course. When she wants to fight, she should stick to that.
Sometimes it becomes very difficult. Like for example, when you say race, caste, so my identity is not just my gender. My identity is also my race, my caste, my religion, my, many other things. So there are many opposing forces that work for me, and for me to withstand that and to be able to fight is very difficult. We have to find the strength and we have to find that support, and we as women who know of this must become that support for women. Like for example, we have certain things where we like in my office, when we get litigants, there'll be someone who's doing very well in life, who runs an office. There'll be another woman who's looking for a job. So then we'll try and tell her that, will you give her a job? I mean, even those kind of small assistance and help, will go in a long way, I think, to empower women. Laws by themselves are not enough.
Thank you so much, Veena. It was very enlightening, discussion, and I hope we will have you again soon in one of our legal awareness program. Thank you so much for today. I think we'll wind up now, and we are out of time. Thank you so much, Veena.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and thank you everyone for listening. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Good luck. Yeah.
Bye.